Good Company podcast to get a welcome. Hope you're well wherever you are watching. Rick, Karle, Lars Anderson, Matt Coulter, and our special guest, the legendary Eli Gold. You carved an hour out of your broadcasting schedule to join us. You are all over the place.
Well, I'm busy, thank God, but no, I love saying I've known you guys for collectively forever. So, no, I'm thrilled to be up here with you, and this is a nice studio and everything. You guys did it right.
Well, big bucks.
Obviously,
when you come to the Good Company podcast, it's the best money Walmart can buy. So let's start from the end. Meaning, now, Jacksonville State. Tell us what you're doing. You're the TV voice up there.
I am. I'm doing all the television broadcasts for JSU Sports. They are part of Conference USA, and one of the bylaws is that every event at home has to be televised.
Okay.
And they have a contract with ESPN Plus. And so anything that JSU plays, now there are some exceptions. Another crew does the soccer. There were a lot of conflicts, so we had to figure things out. But last year I did 106 events for JSU, baseball, basketball at home for men and women. Some football games, of course, volleyball, the coaches' call-in shows, and on it goes. So, I'm loving it because you know what it is in all seriousness, and you guys know it. We've all been in this business. It's keeping me sharp. I'm having to, memorize a roster for, this college and then forget it. And then the next day you're playing another game in another sport against this university. And that's keeping my brain sharp and as sharp as it could be. But, it's really a wonderful, I love the prep. It keeps me young. And, I can't thank anybody at JSU enough.
Hey, let's work backwards from end.
All right.
As Rick said. What happened to Jack State calls you, my good friend Greg Seitz, and go ahead, because, I worked there for a while. Go ahead and do a commercial because I am a huge Gamecock fan. They are wonderful people.
Oh, yes. They are. What happened was the University of Alabama elected to make a change, as has been well documented. 2 hours later, after the release of a press release, 2 hours later, I got this phone call. It was from Greg Seitz, who I had known.
Right.
I knew Greg the first time when he was working in the press room at Talladega.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. But anyway, he called me and says, "How you doing, pal?" And I said, "Well, I've had better days," And he said, "Well, you looking for work, huh?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, I need somebody." He said, "I just lost this young man. He went to work at the University of West Georgia earlier that day or the day prior, something like that." And he said, "I need somebody." And I said, "I'll take it." That's how the conversation went. He said, "Now, don't you want to know what you got to do?" I said, "Well, does it have to do with broadcasting?" He said, "Of course." I said, "I'll take it." And it was quiet on the line. And he says, "Do you want to know what it pays?" I said, "No." I said, "I'm not independently wealthy, but you'll be fair with me. Do you want to know about this and about that?" I said, "No." I said, "You'll treat me fairly." And we're hanging up. I mean, that's truly the extent of the conversation.
It's unbelievable.
And we're hanging up. And I said, "Now, is this for real?" I said, did we just make a deal? He said, "Yes, we've made a deal." I said, "Thank the Lord." I'm not old, but I'm not 20 either. And, you wonder and worry whether you'll be able to get a job after being cut loose like that. And he hired me like that. And then 8 days later, I was on the air doing baseball for Jacksonville State. I think it was UAB in the opener. And, I've been nonstop ever since. So, but they are so nice. We were talking before we started this podcast. Even a big-time superstar like Randy Owen, the lead singer for Alabama, he's on the board of trustees at Jack State. And my phone rings the night that Greg Seitz, literally the night I was let go by Bama and hired by Jack State. I got a phone call and I didn't recognize the caller ID, and I answered hello, and this voice goes, "Brother." I'm saying, I don't have a brother. Said, "Who's this?" It was Randy Owen calling from Fort Payne, just wanting to welcome me to the Jack State family. And everybody there is they're wonderful folks. They really, really are.
Eli, you have such a distinctive voice. Everybody in this state can identify you without seeing you, right? So when you get a call on your cell phone and you don't know the number, do you have a fake Eli Gold voice?
No, actually, many times I just don't answer it. But, excuse me, but that day, there were a lot of people trying to reach me, people who I know but might not have had their number in my phone, what have you. So I kind of made an exception. And this particular area code was up in the Jacksonville area, or Fort Payne, what have you. So I said, I'll just roll the dice, and I answered it. And that was it. It was Randy. And now, I mean, we've become really, really good friends. His wife, Kelly, and my wife, Claudette, they're on the phone. They're talking, they're texting all the time. Just nice, caring people. And that goes for everybody there, from the athletic directors down to the person lowest on the totem pole. Everybody is so very, very nice. And I love that. I really do.
You can actually call them and they'll answer.
Yeah,
not really.
exactly.
Like, hey, Greg, how you doing? For over 30 years, we heard when Bama scored, here's my Eli Gold, touchdown, Alabama. That's pretty close.
Well, I'm glad you have a job here.
What do you say now? Is it touchdown Gamecocks?
Yeah.
Touchdown JSU?
Whatever.
What is your famous line now?
There is none, really.
None? Okay.
Touchdown. I don't do every game. I'm doing the television again. Right. So, like this year, there'll be 3 or 4 games that I do out of the full, because anything that's on CBS, CBS Sportsnet, ESPN, ESPNU, whatever, they bring in their own air talent. The 3 or 4 games that are not on real television, if you will, default to ESPN Plus. Gotcha. And I'll do those broadcasts. Same thing in basketball. I do all the home games for the men and the women, with the exception of like 2 or 3 that might be picked up by, a major TV outlet. But no, I don't worry about it. I'll tell you, people always, some of the biggest question I get is, all right, you walk into the stadium and it's a 25,000 seat stadium if you're at home, sometimes smaller if you're on the road. There's nobody in the stands, relatively speaking. Mm-hmm. Now, JSU, they play, Kennesaw State this week. The game is sold out. There are a few scattered seats available, but it'll still be 25,000, not 102,000. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. When you're writing a column, Lars, when you're reporting about it, Matt, when I'm doing the play-by-play, it doesn't matter how many people are there or how many people are listening or watching. You do your job. You do your same job. You're not cognizant of, I'd say it this way if it was in Sports Illustrated, but since it's not, I'll just, throw a few words together. You don't think like that. You do your best job, and that's what I do.
I'm curious. I always thought that I was writing for 2 people. I was writing for my editor and my father, right? When I was even though I had there's a readership of 24 million at the peak of Sports Illustrated when I was there. Who are you talking to? Who do you feel like?
One person. Just one person, whomever that is. I'm having a personal conversation with one guy or girl out in the listening audience. I describe things very, very clearly, and there's nothing that isn't worth of a description. Many times I think about a person who is blind, who can't see, or people who are away from the TV who are strictly listening to the radio. In the case of when I was at Alabama, it doesn't matter. I'm doing the same broadcast for JSU that I did for the Tide.
Oh, as long as we're talking about your voice, your description, and what you do.
Yeah.
I was thinking about this last night, knowing you're going to come on the show. You're a Brooklyn guy, right?
Yes.
Okay. So I want to know, in Eli Gold's unbelievable way to describe a moment, what was the moment like when you walked into Yankee Stadium as a child?
The first time?
Yeah, the first time.
I remember it vividly. My dad, who was not a sports fan, but he knew I loved sports. I mean, he wouldn't know if a football was blown up or stuffed, but he took me to a Yankee game. It was a Wednesday against the Cleveland Indians. Rocky Colavito was playing for Cleveland at the time. And all we had in those days was black and white television. So, you're in your mind's eye thinking of what it really looks like. Well, we walked through, he got good seats. We were in a box seat.
You take the subway up?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, sure. We didn't have a car.
Yeah.
We didn't have a car. We took the subway. We walk in, come out through the, technically it's called the vomitory, but you walk out through the tunnel, and you can look that up. It is true.
I did not know that. I'm going to steal that from you.
It is truly called a vomitory. The tunnel that leads from the concourse out to the seating area. I don't know why it's called that, but it is. But I walk out, and there's this emerald green grass that just hits me in the face. And all of the things that I've seen in those days, they had orange was a predominant color on the scoreboard, for a lot of the time. And I'm just looking around, taking in everything. It was sensory overload. But it was magnificent. Lord have mercy. It was magnificent. And folks have to remember that when I grew up, New York City, for that short period of time, was a one baseball team city. At that point, the Giants had moved to the West Coast. The Dodgers had moved to the West Coast. The Mets hadn't even been born yet. So New York was a one team city. So if you wanted to pull for your home team, you were pulling for the Yankees. And I just have stayed with them all my life, gotten to know a few guys, met a lot of people, but I am still a Yankee fan through and through.
See, I'm a Red Sox fan, so that.
Oh God!
Oh yeah, no, I'm kidding. You've been there, right?
Oh yeah.
I'd never been to Yankee Stadium. My daughter graduated from NYU a couple years ago, and they had graduation at Yankee Stadium.
Really?
So it's really cool. So we're right behind home plate.
Did they wear pinstripe gowns?
No, they should have. But it was a beautiful day, spring day. It was in May, obviously,
right?
And that was a lot of fun. But you started selling like peanuts and popcorn at Madison Square Garden when you were a kid.
Yes.
How old were you? And tell me how that came about.
I was, 14 maybe.
How'd you get in there?
Well, you were able to work. You got working papers, as they were called in New York. I don't know what they're called anywhere else, but and I couldn't afford tickets. My dad had passed away when I was very young. My mom was working, but we didn't have money to spare. So I said, what's the next best thing to do? And that would be to go to the game and have them pay me to be there. And because of my age, I could not sell beer. I was underage, so I couldn't sell beer, which got you the most money because your pay was based on how much product you moved, how much product you sold. I could have sold hot dogs, but in those days you had those big old giant things with sterno under here, keeping the water boiling and sloshing around. And that was too much like work. So I decided to sell peanuts, which paid virtually nothing, but it got me into the garden. And then I deliberately, other than for the circus and the Royal Lipizan stallions and stuff like that, where I'd work down low and in a good seat area, for the sporting events, for the Knicks and the Rangers and the NIT and all the other stuff, I worked upstairs in the blue seats. Why? Because it was closest to the press box. And I could see and meet and watch the broadcasters. And in those days, They built the new Madison, what is still the new Madison Square Garden. They built it without a bathroom in the press box. And, so these guys are always having to scamper to the men's room or the ladies' room, if correct. And they, so I would I would verbally tackle them and ask questions. But that's why I worked upstairs to be near. And then during the game, I'd watch a lot of the game, but I'd also have an eye on the radio booth just to see these guys talking into a headset. I couldn't hear them, too much crowd noise, but to watch them and to see them reading some copy off of a card or have something that the stage manager hand to them. It was just magical to me.
So that was where it all began.
Yes.
When was your first professional gig?
My first professional gig was a minor league hockey game. And it was for any hockey fans who were watching, it was the league about which the movie Slapshot was made. It was the Eastern Hockey League, in those days, the absolute bottom rung in the hockey world.
Wasn't that in Syracuse?
Well, yeah, it was a team in Syracuse. Yeah. I worked at Bob Costas was the voice of the Syracuse Blazers, along with Andy McWilliams, who went on to be the voice of the Cincinnati Reds. I did the games in Long Island with a gentleman named John Della Camera, who is now one of the top soccer broadcasters in the world. But yes, that was, if you got as a player or a broadcaster, if you got cut from the Eastern Hockey League, you were going home. There was no other stop on the ladder. And I worked, and my pay, the owner of the team, a gentleman by the name of Al Barron, who owned an electric company, an electric outlet place, he owned the team, and he said, look, I'll take care of all your expenses and this and that, and I'll pay you something at the end of the season. And I said, fine. I was living at home. I had no expenses to speak of other than the Long Island Railroad to get out to Comac, Long Island, where the team was located. But I had no I didn't have a car or anything. So I did those games. End of the season, he hands me a $50 gift certificate to Sears. That was my pay.
Your pay.
How many games we're talking about? 30, 40?
Oh, more than that. But my real pay was being on the air for 70 some odd games and learning. And it was a low impact broadcast. I mean, it was a small minor league team. The radio station, WRCN in Riverhead, New York, the signal probably went from this end of the table to that end of the table here. It was just a low impact broadcast, but it gave me the opportunity to learn the business and to, if you will, perfect. Not that I ever did perfect, but I did okay. And then that led to another job and to another job. And I worked my way up the ladder, eventually to the National Hockey League, with the St. Louis Blues and later with the Nashville Predators. But all of that has to start somewhere. Whoever you think is the greatest hitter, the greatest manager, the greatest whatever, they started someplace on the low end of that totem pole, and that's what I did.
Yeah. Didn't hockey bring you to Birmingham?
It did, yes. Yeah, when the Birmingham Bulls came here in the WHA, which was in those days the competing major league to the National Hockey League, Birmingham picked up the Toronto Toros. Toronto was in the WHA, but they couldn't compete with the Toronto Maple Leafs in that market. So they moved to Birmingham. The Bulls, Toros, they kept the same logo, saved a few dollars, and they hired me to do the radio. Actually, Gary Sanders, longtime voice of the Auburn Tigers and sports on Channel 13, Gary was doing a little hockey on the radio, but he was a nightly sports anchor at Channel 13. And he had just too many conflicts, but he was there he helped them out and got them going. And then I was working for their minor league affiliate in Hampton, Virginia, the Hampton Gulls. They were the farm team for the Birmingham Bulls. And when the Bulls needed a radio guy, the call went out. And in February of that season, I guess that would be 77, if I'm not mistaken, they brought me into Birmingham And the very next week, I was on a road trip to Edmonton, Calgary, and Winnipeg. I mean, I thought I had made it.
How close were we to getting a NHL?
NHL? Well, the opportunity was there. However, John Bassett, the owner, I think made the right decision as much as I hated it. Birmingham was a day of the week community. And what I mean by that, it didn't matter if you were playing the first place team or the last place team. If it was Wednesday, you were going to get X number of fans. And Saturday, didn't matter if you were playing the Montreal Canadiens or the Hoboken Hobos, you'd get the same. You never heard of them, did you? You'd get the same number of people. It was all based, the weekend crowds were great. The midweek crowds were not so good. And the bottom line was the expense and the cost of going into the NHL would not have been offset by the community. It was still not hockey knowledgeable to that point. And if it was a Wednesday game, church would always win out over going to the hockey. If it was a weekend game, the place would be full. So he opted to go with the good business decision, and we dropped back into the Central Hockey League and hooked up with the Minnesota North Stars, and the team became the Birmingham South Stars. And that's how it remained for a while.
Eli, let's shift gears here a little bit and go to the University of Alabama. And I've written many times, and I believe this, that the best way to understand the end of a story is to have an appreciation for the beginning of the story. Mm-hmm. So give us the tale of how you got hired by the University of Alabama.
That's a great question. I really don't know. I do, but I don't. I was not the best candidate. I mean, there were people from ESPN. There were people much, much more qualified and much more seasoned who had applied for the job back in 1988 when it opened up. However, Wimp Sanderson, who was the basketball coach at the time, Wimp had heard me doing some games. I had done some freelance work, and I had done some work for UAB. And he heard me, liked the job I did, and he said, we need to hire that guy. And long story short, I was hired to do basketball in the 88-89 season. And the late John Forney was brought back to do his 30th year of football. So we had two different broadcasters doing the games. And as that year went along, I did all right, and the basketball team was always good under Wimp. And John, God bless him, rest his soul, he had had a couple of strokes, and he was struggling a bit behind the microphone. February of that season, so February of 89, I got a phone call. I was on the road. I was in Richmond, Virginia, getting ready to do a NASCAR race that weekend. But I did have to still fly to Knoxville to do basketball on Saturday. And I got a phone call from a gentleman by the name of Tommy Limbaugh, who was he was designated by athletic director Steve Sloan to hire the new voice of the Crimson Tide. And we met. We were sitting about 16 rows up at Thompson Bowling Arena in those terrible orange seats. Mm-hmm. And he basically said, "Do you want the football job?" And before he spit it out, I said, "Yes." Wow. And that's how I got the job.
Wow.
I wasn't so sure I'd make it through year number one. Number one, I knew that I was not that good at doing football. I knew that. I was okay. I could BS my way through to some degree, but I was not Keith Jackson by any stretch of the imagination. But they hired me, and they stuck with me. Burt Bank, who ran the network in those days, and Doug Layton and Jerry Duncan, everybody, they all stuck with me. Excuse me. And I got hired, not knowing if I'd make it to game two, let alone year two. As it turned out, I made it to year 36.
Wow, 36.
And I was very, very blessed by that.
You talk about fate and how things happen. 1989, I'm up here doing color for a UAB game, and my agent says, "Hey, there's a job opening for the sports director at WBRC, Channel 6. You want to go meet the news director? Their sports guy's leaving. Or they're making, they're looking for a guy. You know who the guy's leaving was. Right here. Yeah. Because he got the Bama gig. And you were doing NASCAR.
I was doing NASCAR, and I was just doing a little work for for Channel 6. Mm-hmm. But it wasn't what I wanted to do. I wasn't a studio guy, but they were, paying very, very good money. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to lie. And I couldn't justify leaving that on the table. So I did. But I was, I don't want to say a renegade because I'm a nice guy, but I couldn't write a script. I would sit there and look into the camera. I knew the subject matter, and I would ad lib. And they hated that. The director didn't know what to put up behind
when to roll the video.
Yeah, when there says, and I would always say, kind of like Warner Wolf, let's go to the video here and take a look at such and such. And they didn't know when I was going to stop. So we did well, but I think they were happy to see me go. And when the Bama job opened up, I left.
Well, thank you for leaving, Eli, by the way.
You're welcome, sir. Yeah.
You got Rick a job. So.
I'll send you my invoice.
But that led to so many other things.
Yeah.
The University of Alabama. And this is just a really broad, kind of lame question, but what do you remember the most? And particularly since I had the pleasure of working with Snake Staber.
Yes.
He was my color analyst guy for a while. Do you have any memories, broadcast memories? I mean, there are way too many football memories to talk about, but what's a Snake story?
Oh Lord, I got to figure out which ones I can tell on family video like this. What always impressed me was his knowledge of the game. That was the thing. It's kind of like I walked into a meeting. This is true with the next color guy, Phil Savage, who had been the general manager of the Browns, and he was working with me. And we walked into a meeting with Nick Saban, and I was like the extra guy. We had just come off the practice field, and I was with Phil, and Phil had to go in and see Coach Saban, and I followed in with their permission. And those guys were talking in a language that I didn't understand. I mean, we all think we know football. I got news for you. We don't know diddly. We don't know diddly. Those guys would talk at a level so high. And that's one thing I remember about Snake. He would talk with the coaches. He would talk and how good he was. And this is what makes a really good color man. Snake had the ability to take his knowledge. I hate to use the term dumb it down, but he did. So us normal folks could understand it. He could analyze a play in 11 seconds because on radio, that's all you have between plays because you have to physically speak and show, wide receivers here, this guy's here, they're in the shotgun, whatever it is. You don't have that on TV. TV, you've got more time as a color man. On radio, in and out, make it understandable. And I said, my goodness, this guy's good. That's what I realized. But Snake was just, he was different. He was different. But, he would record every play during the game. He'd be sitting here. He'd have a big yellow, legal pad and he'd be diagramming plays. He'd write at the top. He'd go, 3:16. No, he wasn't that religious. He was writing it because it was a 3rd and 16 play. And if ever it happened later in the game, he'd remember that. And he'd always wet his like this.
When he passed, what do you score about?
Exactly. And he'd go and he'd look and he'd find it. Now remember, that's how he talked. Now you remember back in the opening quarter, they did this and this and this and this and this. And, son of a gun, if they didn't do it again, or we combated it with an adjustment on the defense. So Kenny was great, but, he was so funny. We would tell stories and I would talk about, the great Leroy Jordan who was at the game. not too long deceased now, but Leroy came into the booth and Snake said, "Oh man, I've been underneath him," stuff like that. He was great. He really was.
The contrast between Brooklyn and Foley on air, I've never heard anything like it in my life. And y'all worked so well together.
Really
Your chemistry was so obvious. But to hear you, Brooklyn, and here's this Foley, Alabama, Ken Staber.
That's right,
it was just a beautiful radio broadcast.
Well, I appreciate it. Snake was so good. And, I was smart, if I do say so myself. I knew that I was sitting next to a Super Bowl winning quarterback. What right did I have to analyze a play, to inject my thought on what happened right or wrong? I just did the play and then I shut up and let Snake do all the analysis. When we would be sitting there with Joe Namath, Joe would come and visit with us a couple times a year. And here I sat with Snake to my right and Joe Willie to my left. And I would call the play and then not say a word, let those two boys have at it. And it was magnificent radio. Number one, they were friends. They were funny, but obviously they knew football inside out and backwards. And I was smart enough to hush up and get out of the way and let Snake be Snake and Joe be Joe. And we had a great broadcast because of that.
And you talk about dynamics and relationships. Coach Saban, 17 years there. You did the coach's show right after the game, I guess. You recorded it, right, after the game?
No, we did that live I didn't do the TV.
Oh, you didn't do the TV?
No, I did the radio for the coach's show.
The Hey Coach.
Yeah.
That was Thursday nights.
Right.
Usually at Buffalo or Baumhauer's or one of the
Baumhauer's.
How was he to work with down through the years? I know that I guessed it a couple of times, but
he was great to work with. I respected him, obviously. He respected me. He knew that I wasn't going to try and trip him up as some other hosts might have in different settings. So we had a great time. There were times when I did things that he didn't like, because I just didn't know. One of the early times, I've told this story before, one of the early times we recorded the pregame show, and he always liked to do that 2 hours before kickoff. Other coaches, I would do it Thursday, we would do it Friday. Nick Saban, 2 hours before kickoff. He thought that was the most important interview of the week, not because I was doing it, but because it was right up against kickoff. Anything that might have happened overnight, if a guy woke up with the flu, if in that textbook situation of years ago, he told me about that and we were able to talk about it on the pregame show. We would go 2 hours before.
Was that live, Eli, or no?
No, it was taped. It was live to tape.
Played back pretty quickly.
Oh, yes. It was played back within an hour and a half, 1 hour and a quarter of the end. There was no editing to it. It was live to tape. But I remember I asked him one time to compare this running back to that running back. And they were both world-class running backs. And if you know anything about Nick Saban, he abhors having to compare anybody. Because if you say something great about player A and you don't say it the same thing about player B, then automatically player B is not nearly as good, and that's not the case, and da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And I asked him to compare a couple of great running backs in their style, not their ability, but their style, which I thought was a valid question. Anyway, he answers it. He gives me this look while he's answering it. And it's only me and him in this locker room area. And he gives me this look and he answers it. And it was not a good answer. He just didn't want to tackle it. And when we wrapped up those shows, within seconds, he was up off his chair and he was out the door before I even had a chance to finish the program. Before I had a chance to say, this is, the Nick Saban Show brought to you by da-da-da-da-da-da, and the commercial tagline, and we're back after. He was already gone. Well, this day, he sat there and let me finish and was still sitting there. And I'm saying to myself,
that's the longest tag you've ever done, right?
I started reading War and Peace as the tag, and it felt like he had taken, look, it felt like somebody had taken a hypodermic needle and shoved it into my spine and then let the ice cold water go. I mean, I said, uh-oh. Well, we finish and he says, now that was a stupid question. I said, and I started answering him back. I said, Coach, why is it a stupid question? You know, to start comparing this guy. And he stared at me. And I said, okay, whatever. I knew I wasn't going to win that conversation. And that was the end of it. But I then learned he just does not like to compare players. He won't do it. And, but that's just things you learn.
That's him. You learn. Or
you don't learn and you get,
as you go.
Let go.
Or hypotheticals. Yes. He doesn't like that. Would you someday like to be the commissioner of football?
Did you ever ask him about depth charts? I'm just kidding. They're interrupting. But I bet you didn't.
No, I didn't.
But if you said, would you someday like to be a commissioner of college football? Now, why would I answer that? Yeah. That's a hypothetical. Yeah, I mean, that's, exactly. But yeah, he gets testy about that. Yeah.
All right. Well, let's keep moving forward here. Right. And now, I loved your description of the first time you walked into Yankee Stadium.
Yeah.
Indelible memory. For me, first time I walked into Memorial Stadium in Lincoln, Nebraska, I was 7 years old.
Right.
I was so overwhelmed, and I just knew I want to do something with this.
Sure.
Didn't know what, right? Had no idea.
Are you a Nebraskan?
I'm a Nebraskan.
I didn't know
yes,
that.
He's a Lincoln guy.
Name my son Lincoln after where I grew up.
I didn't know that.
And then the first time we met was on the set of the Nick Saban show. And there was after one break, or during a break after I'd asked Nick too many questions about his dad and his dad dying at a young age of 46. Yeah. He grabbed me by the leg.
Yeah.
I had no idea he was so strong. And he said, enough of the psychological BS, Lars. I'm like, okay. And then when we came out of break, I'm like, so what do you think of that LSU secondary, coach? But going just indelible memories. What is one or two that sticks out from your time calling Alabama games, national championships, amazing wins, gut-wrenching losses? Coaches, players, they always remember the losses more than the wins. How about you? Is there something that's just not obvious that sticks out to you?
Well, to me, just walking into the stadium, getting set for a game, even in the NFL, I've been blessed to do NFL games for 10 years. You walk in, we walked into Green Bay one day, me and my spotter, Butch Owens, and our statistician, Brian Roberts, and we just all looked at each other and said, this doesn't suck. And I mean, that's exactly what we said. So walking into the stadium for one of the biggest games where folks are spending thousands to get in and you're there and you're getting to do what you love to do, and that's broadcast, and you get paid and all of those things. But, as you asked you put things in a very interesting way, because when people ask me what was my favorite game or what was my most memorable game, two totally different answers.
Can I guess?
Yeah.
Most memorable game, kick six.
He probably doesn't want to remember that any more than I do.
Yeah.
Just because it was so shocking.
That was most memorable.
As a Bama broadcaster, and then the other one might be 2nd and 26, Tua to
Devontae. Yeah, you're right on. But there have been so many. There really have been. The thing I can just hope for is that I get them right, and I thank God made that, fairly, even the very last, as it turns out now, my last call as the voice of the Tide was the Gravedigger throw into the corner of the end zone. I didn't know that was my last call, but I got it right. And and of course with the end zone press box at Auburn, I was probably 130, 140 yards away from the play. Yes, using binoculars, but still, but I was able to get it right. But, there are so many great plays. I loved going into, great stadiums. I loved going into the Rose Bowl, where I have done, I guess, 4 or 5 broadcasts over the years. That was so special, looking out to your left, and there are the San Gabriel Mountains and all. I mean, it's a setting you've heard about all your life. In hockey, doing a game from the old Montreal Forum, and doing a game from Madison Square Garden after selling peanuts there for all those years, going back as the voice of a hockey team, and even basketball, where we've done basketball games from the Garden. I've been blessed, Lars. I don't know if I can come up with just one in all of that, but mixed in there are some great games, memorable and forgettable.
You have a great call, like didn't you one of was it the Pasadena one when you said the roses are crimson?
The roses in this grand old stadium are once again crimson.
That was
my producer Tom Stipe and I worked on ideas. We never wrote anything down verbatim. I didn't read, but Tom Stipe was always pushing me to be creative, to come up with ideas, to come up with something that'll put a bow on the whole situation, whatever the situation was. And when we were in Miami and, rolling up on a South Beach was another national championship, stuff like that. But obviously, some of the older folks who are watching will remember that back in the day, West Coast football was the power. Southern college football in those days wasn't what it is today. And then all of a sudden, Bama goes out there again and beats Texas in California. And where the Tide had gone on the train years ago and won and brought with it, the national championship back to Tuscaloosa. And we came up with the roses in this grand old stadium are once again crimson.
That was a good one.
Pretty good line. Good line.
Most broadcasters have it. Do you believe in miracles?
Yeah, but Eli, I want to dive into you. Most of it you want to do spontaneously.
Yes.
You don't want to think, and I'll say this because Jim Nance is a wonderful broadcaster, but I think he stays awake in his hotel. I don't know this, and tries to think of the perfect thing to say when Tiger Woods wins the Masters.
Yeah.
But as a true play-by-play guy, if I'm not mistaken, you don't think about it that much because you want to describe spontaneous live beauty.
And you don't often have the opportunity.
Right.
Tua getting ready to throw to Devontae after taking a sack. Right. I had absolutely no idea that the next play was going to win the championship. As a matter of fact, Phil Savage and I were talking on the air about, get part of this yardage back on this play and hopefully get the rest of the yardage on the next play. So I had no idea. And the game was in Atlanta. And with no disrespect to the city of Atlanta, but there was nothing really special to say about Atlanta that would impact the Alabama fan. What are you going to say? And from the home of Coca-Cola, there was nothing. So I just sat back and as a matter of fact, Kirk Herbstreit tells me, and I appreciate that, and I don't say that to drop names, but I respect him. He said that was one of the best off-the-cuff recaps. He scores, Alabama climbs to the top of the national championship mountain, whatever the heck I said. And I said, and for Coach Nick Saban, it's national championship number there, ties him with this, does this. And then I finished by saying, Alabama, again, the champion of college football. And I said to myself in that instance, I said, that's going to sound like crap if I don't say something else, because my voice was on an upward lilt. I said, college football. And I'm sitting there, and in a split second, all of this runs through your brain. And I said, I'm going to give a little tip of the hat here to a former voice of the Crimson Tide, Mel Allen. the great voice of the Yankees, whose favorite saying was, "How about that?" And that's how I ended that cut. Football, how about that? And then it could play as a freestanding bite without it sounding like I was upcut.
So that literally just came to
literally
you
in that
the millisecond.
instant.
Your wheels are turning and turning, and you do it in less than a millisecond.
Yeah, but that's
It's brilliant that you have that capability.
Well, I've been blessed. I'm lucky. I can't remember to bring home milk, but I can. But I can come up with stuff like that. But that's how that happened. It just popped into my head, and I said, "Boy, I can't leave him with a cut that sounds like I was cut off, only because I couldn't finish it." So I came up with that, and it happened like that.
So we need to talk about the end, right? With Alabama.
I was let go.
Yeah. Would you peel back the curtain for us and let us know whatever you're comfortable talking about?
There wasn't much to it. Obviously, I had missed a year because of cancer. And, I didn't know if I'd live, let alone come back behind. But I'll tell you, coming back behind the microphone was the motivation for me. I love being on the air. And I had to get back. And the university brought me back that first year after cancer and told me, look, just do the home games. You don't need to travel yet. Do the home games. But then in the next sentence, they said, and you can go to Auburn. Well, if I'm going to Auburn, I certainly could have gone to Starkville. But, and my wife, God bless her, Claudette, said, something's not right here, but I don't know what it was. And then the next year, they, told me that they have decided to go in a different direction, which was totally their right. My contract was up. They didn't owe me a penny of money. Everything business-wise was straight. They just chose to go in a different direction. I thought, I was told at one point that my work wasn't up to par, up to my standards. I, respectfully disagreed because I listened, and I still do listen to almost all my games. And I'm my own most severe critic, as maybe you are in your lines of work. But they just chose to go in a different direction. And that's what they told me. They said, well, we've just decided to go in a different direction. Well, after 36 years, I thought I was deserving of a bit more of an explanation. Why? What's the deal? Well, we've decided to go in a different direction. And, you're not going to beat City Hall. So, it was what it was. I asked, they asked me if I was going to speak to the media. And I said, certainly, because I know it's going to be a story. And they said, well, what are you going to say? And I said, I'm going to say exactly, verbatim, word for word, what you have told me, that you have decided to go in a different direction. Well, you really can't say that. I said, well, that's what you said to me. And I said, look, you've got to own this. And I'm not going to go into any greater detail, but that was their response. I didn't like it, but, life goes on. But I did think I was owed more of an explanation than a human resources department response. But such is life. I don't know what happened. I don't know what the deal, who was at fault or who was responsible. But, that's behind us now.
Eli, did you ask for another year? Just
I did.
Simply
I
hey,
did.
Let me go out.
They asked me, we talked about options. They talked about doing an Eli Gold day at the stadium in conjunction with an A-Day game.
Yeah. It was the A-Day game, not a regular season.
Yeah, it was the A-Day game, and I just didn't want that. I didn't think that was appropriate. And then they said, how about you go out, we finish this year, this coming season, whatever the season was, and and I said, fine. And then I'll go away and you'll never hear from me again. Well, they chose not to do that. They chose to make a change. And again, that was totally their right to do. I'm not saying they didn't they had every right to make a change. I had a 5-year deal. The last one was a 5-year deal and it expired, or it lapsed, it finished. And, again, they didn't owe me a penny and they just wanted to make a change. And that was that.
So I left, Sports Illustrated, right, after 20 years, and kind of my decision, kind of their decision type of situation, similar to yours, I think. What was it like just in the immediate few days after you were relieved of having this exalted position?
Well, what it was like, I got a ton of texts and calls from, you name it, from Sean McDonough, from you name it, the biggest names in the business. Everybody called. What happened? But again, I was comforted at that point because I had already had a job offer, which I accepted, the deal at Jacksonville State. But it was different. I have not been back to Tuscaloosa since that day. I have not set foot into Bryant-Denny Stadium. I have not spoken with anybody, since then. I've seen some, but I have made it a point not to engage them in conversation. Life goes on. Life goes on. It was sad. I loved that university. I loved the people. I loved the players, the coaches. Everybody treated me well. But I'll tell you, getting to Jacksonville State, getting to Jack State showed me the other side of college sports. The nicest people who care about you, who care about your family. You're not a commodity, you're a person. I found that to be very, very refreshing. And Matt, you worked for JSU in the past. You know what I'm talking about.
Sure do.
They're just great, great people. But I can say nothing about the university. My God, look at what they allowed me to experience in 36 years. Traveling the world, doing games in Hawaii and wherever. It doesn't matter. Wonderful. And the fans, that's the one thing through all of this, the fans and the memories will never leave me. Never, ever, ever leave me. They can't take the memories away. They can't take the friendships away. So from that standpoint, I am far wealthier than I ever was.
Well, we are far wealthier having you in our lives and listening.
You're very kind.
It's been great. Like we mentioned earlier, that Eli Gold voice, man.
Yeah.
Real quick, before we wind down, you've done NASCAR for so many years. I've always wanted to ask.
41 years.
And Matt, Earnhardt Sr., now as a local guy, you always have to be on the ball because a lot like Coach Saban, he's quick and knowledgeable, but he appreciated you if you were knowledgeable. Where his son, I think, is a little softer and
they're different.
They're different. But what was Earnhardt Sr. like for you?
He was great.
Was he?
Oh my goodness. And I don't like to drop names, but we developed a very, very special friendship. When Dale went on the road middle of the week to San Angelo, Texas, to make an appearance at a car dealership, I would go as the guest MC to kind of keep things going. And if the questions didn't come, I'd seed the conversation and so on. We traveled a lot together. He did a lot of these shows on QVC. And I was always there with him. Claudette would travel with us. We had a relationship. We would go to restaurants in Watkins Glen when the teams were up there for the weekend. And my daughter and his daughter are the same age, and they used to crawl around on the floor of the restaurant together. So we had a good relationship that we didn't necessarily talk about, but it was there. And, obviously I could ask him to do things and so on. He was a wonderful, wonderful man. And that to me was one of the worst days of my life. When you listen to the radio call of him passing away at Daytona, that's my voice that described that accident, that particular day. For a myriad of reasons, I was working out in turns 3 and 4 of Daytona, and that accident happened not quite, but virtually at my feet. So, it was tough, but he was a great guy. All those fellas were. In those days, NASCAR was different. You didn't have to go through all these agents. You didn't have to go through all these PR people. You'd be able to just pick up the phone and, get Earnhardt on his tractor as he's working out on the lower 40. It's changed. I don't know if it's changed for the best, but that's neither here nor there. But Dale was a great guy, as were all of those older generation, the David Pearson, Cale Yarborough, Bobby and Donnie Allison, those people who made the sport were very, very special.
Final question from me. What did you think of Matt's performance in Talladega Nights?
Good.
And should it have been Eli Gold?
No, it shouldn't have been. It shouldn't have been.
I've never thought about that. I bet your residual checks would be a lot bigger than mine.
I don't know. I got a residual check for something the other day. True story. I won't tell you which movie it was, but I had done one of the voice tracks on it, and I got a check for like $12.74.
My last was $9.47.
I beat you.
See? No telling what would have happened if you'd been in Talladega Nights.
So 2 movie stars here.
Yeah.
Thank you, Eli. Appreciate you. We will be watching you.
Thank you.
Call Jack State games, and you and your buddy Randy Owen and all the famous.
All the folks, and they're great people. And thank you for having me on.
This has been a pleasure.
You guys, I've known you. We've all been together. It's amazing. This is the first time we've sat down like this and done a show. It's because we've got like a century amongst us here,
right.
in broadcast history. But thanks again, fellas.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Eli.